Father started the business in Hollyfield Road in Surbiton in 1934. He'd already worked for record-breaking cars like Ginger Hamilton and different people throughout his time. Now they started off as a Vauxhall dealership in Hollyfield Road, which they built workshops out of corrugated iron, which obviously after the war effort there was lots of it about, so that was quite handy. Now Charles Cooper, he used to have a aeroplane which was called the Flying Flea, which was built from an Austin 7 engine. He was supposed to have used it a couple of times, but it wasn't powerful enough for him to use. He kept that in the workshops there, but he took the engine out and built John, when he was 12, a special Austin 7, which is still in existence today. Now, hopefully we might see it a few times this year. Now, by then, they were obviously doing bits and pieces in the workshop, and in 1935 they built two prototype Cooper 500s. Now they used Jap engines and the Norton Manx engines from the motorcycles. Now in 1936 they raced it at Prescott Hill climb and did very well. Didn't win, but they did very well. So they thought that they would continue with this. They were asked to start building a few cars, so then they got involved with doing the speed trials at Brighton, and in the speed trials there, that's where John first met Sir Alec Isigonis. Now Deb's got a couple of cups that he also went on to win a race at Silverstone, and he also came second, I believe, wasn't it, Deb?
Yep.
Now these cups have obviously got John Cooper's name on them. Should put them on the top there, you can have a look as and when. But they were
cheers.
tin pot tip, that's why the tin pot cups, but yeah, quite special with John Cooper's name on them. So, but John obviously carried on racing, and he came up with the people like Sterling Moss and people like that at the time, Ivan Barden, but he wasn't as good as what they were. He did start to realise that, but we had Sir Sterling. He came down to Cooper's and saw a nice shiny Cooper 500 in the showroom in Yule Road. He bought that car, and he visited the garage quite a lot of times, and with that he used to come in and he did press-ups against the mechanics. Now I thought, oh yeah, right, yeah, you come to the... And I asked Sir Sterling one evening, and I said, is that true? He said, yes, it is true, and I always won. So yes, he was at the garage quite a lot. Now Cooper's had a rented flat in Yule Road, which was overlooking the garage. That is still there on the corner of Hollyfield Road and Yule Road. So the Coopers didn't ever have far to come into the garage. Now, John Cooper actually took the car out onto the Kingston bypass. I expect you've seen it on YouTube and places like that on the internet. Now, one day he was out on the A3 on the Kingston bypass, coming back through Surbiton, and he saw a police motorbike coming the other way. So John thought, oh my God. So he put his foot down, coming back through Surbiton. The man on the policeman on the bike turned his bike round and started to chase John. Well, the mechanics were on the workshop waiting for John to come back on the forecourt, and as he came in, he shouted out, "Quick, close the doors, and he shot in, and the guys closed the doors, hid all behind the benches. By that time, the police motorbike had arrived, and he was looking through the windows, couldn't see anybody, but they were all peering behind the workshop benches. So yeah, that was one of the stories he told us, which was always quite funny. But John was selling people to people like Bernie Eccleston, Sterling Moss, out to the States, Australia. Cars were going everywhere. They were getting orders from everywhere at the time. In 1947, they became the Cooper Car Company, and they started to build Formula 2 cars. Mike Hawthorne was one of those that bought one of the cars, and he was obviously very successful. Didn't race for Coopers, but he raced a Cooper, and he went on to be the first world champion, British world champion. Then Cooper took on a man called Owen Maddox. He became the chief designer at Cooper's, even though when he first started, he was just the sweeper up boy. Anyway, he was known as Whiskers because he had a big beard. And Owen, he went on to design a world record car for Cooper's. And here's a couple of the drawings. I've got the originals at home, but I have taken copies because the other ones are too precious to bring in. Now, this is all signed by Owen Maddox, dated as well. So we got, this one's the record-breaking car, and the other one's a blueprint of a two-seater race car that he'd done. So they still survive today, and that picture is in the Cooper car book that John had produced later on. A gentleman called Jack Westcott, who was from Plymouth. He bought a Cooper 500 and raced it. He also had a couple of other cars, but he was very successful in some of his races. And we've actually got his actual helmet and goggles. So this dates back to the 1940s. And if you have a look on your pages there, you'll see on page 2, you'll see Jack Westcott. And that was actually Jack's. Now, on that corrugated workshops there, before it became the iconic bone frontage, there was a tyre gauge. If you have a look on your following page, after Jack Westcott's bits, there was a tyre gauge on the wall with these staff standing outside the garage. Right. And as can be seen, that is still the original tyre gauge pump. Put it on there, darling, and then they can have a look later.
You're right. Are you told to be in it? I'm joking, no joke.
John was always trying to, John Cooper was always trying to drive the company forward, but his father Charles was a very tight-fisted man. Charles would try and economise, especially to the welding shop, we would ask them to turn the lights out. The lads in the workshop said, well, we can't really see. And Charles would say, there's enough light coming from the welding torch. So things were quite very tight at that time. Cooper's built Formula 2, Formula 3 cars, MGs, Jaguars, and then they took on Roy Salvadori as a driver in the late 50s, and Jack Brabham came to work for Cooper's. He came over from Australia, and when he was coming over from Australia, he popped into Cooper's when he was going into London, and as he came in, John asked him if he'd like to start work. And he says, I'll take you on tomorrow if you want to start. So John took him on, but he had nowhere to live, but he had a caravan. And between the garage and the pub, there used to be a stream that used to run along between the garage, and they had a little bridge that used to go over so that they could go out of the back door into the pub. And Charles Cooper used to feed the ducks on the bridge. Well, Jack used to come in be in the pub car park with the caravan, and then used to come over the bridge into work. So after they designed the Formula 1 car with the rear engine, Jack and John, they took Jack on to be their F1 driver and paid him. Now, Jack had already been racing in Australia before, so he was a good driver anyway. And then they took, Jack asked if he could bring in Bruce McLaren. So Bruce McLaren came in there to work as their number 2 driver. But as he arrived, he said, well, where's my car? So Charles and John went, well, it's over there. He said, well, what do you mean? It's not even built. He said, no, you get on, you build it. So we can understand why Bruce went on to build some fantastic cars. Sorry, I've lost myself now. Cooper's won the Formula 1 in 1959 with Jack Brabham pushing his car over the finishing line when he ran out of fuel a couple of 100 yards before. And obviously Jack was a bit of a menace for that, John used to say. He used to, you know, because of the weight distribution of it, he used to suck a little bit out first, and that's what happened to him. Then they went out to the Indianapolis in '59 as well. They built a rear engine car for that, which was very successful. And if you have a look on your next page there after the pump there, you'll see that this was the visa slip for John Cooper when he went out to the Holiday Inn in 1959, dated. So he never really pushed the boat out and where he stayed, but that was just a little bit of proof that he was out there and when he was. In 1960, Jack also won the World Championship. So Cooper's have won 2 years running. I mean, you know, what little place like that would they ever think that it was up against Ferraris and Lotus, everything else at the time, the Connaughts and things. And John, after that, it wasn't quite so good. Jack left, went on to form his own company. So Bruce became the number 1 driver, but Jack then, as Jack went, Bruce was never allowed to go into the drawing office anymore to have a look, because he couldn't be trusted after Bruce had left. So, but none of the drivers were paid much money for for racing for Coopers. Most of their money was made up of sponsorship, and they were given their cars at the end of the season which they could go on and sell. So if they kept them now, they would be worth millions, but they had to sell them to move on again in life. Now within the garage, at that time, the front of the garage, or the garage, the workshop, the tin pot garage, was then redeveloped, and they did the iconic building, which on here we can see is a bow-fronted garage now, which still remains today as a garage and as a Porsche dealership. This has got John Cooper in his Austin 7, and obviously we've got Charles and John here, and this is the flat where John lived, and Charles, and one of John's daughters, Tina, she was born upstairs in the flat itself. So it was only a small showroom, enough for one racing car and one Mini. Upstairs in the wooden, upstairs in this office up here was John and Charles' office, which was a lovely panelled office. And in that office, they both shared. And one day, John was on the phone to the USA trying to do a deal. And Charles walked into the office and said, "John, what are you doing?" He said, quiet Dad, I'm on the phone to the USA. So he got the phone and pulled it straight out the socket and threw it out the window. Well, this is one of the phones which actually came from the building.
Did you catch it?
But yeah, I caught it. I don't think it's the one, but the other one was in bits. But we've got a picture of John on the phone, not well, before. So this was a picture, as you can see, that's one of the pictures of John on the phone there. But John would always tell us that at Christmas parties, that story.
Why did he throw it out the window?
Why did he
pull it out and throw it out the window?
Because he was on the phone to the USA. So he said, why did you throw? He said, Dad, they phoned me.
It wasn't the topic, it was the bill.
Sorry?
It wasn't the subject of the topic, it was the bill that concerned him.
Yeah. Definitely. He didn't want to pay for anything, Charles Cooper. In the early 60s, John wanted to start racing the new Mini. He went to Alex Izigonis, who he'd obviously met and was a good friend of Alex's, and Herriman at BMC, and said to them, you know, what do you think about me racing, you know, you having a race car, rally car, what do you think? So basically Alex wasn't in favour, as he wanted it as a little shopping car, but they went ahead anyway. They built 1,000 Mini Coopers, which they had to get homologated, and John received for that, he received £2 for each car, and they built over 200,000 cars. In 1961 was the first Mini Cooper, and then, as we know now, 1963 he then done the Cooper S. They also built special Minis there as well, a bit like they did at John Cooper's, and some of them are still seen out there on some of the rallies and things on today. Then they went on to build, because they were outgrowing themselves, they had to have some bigger premises, so they had some premises at Canada Road, which unfortunately that place is not there, and that was very near to Brooklands. Now, John came up with an idea of putting the engine in the back and the front of a Mini. And John was coming back from Fair Oaks Airport to have dinner with Roy Salvadori at his house, and he was coming back along the Kingston bypass. This Kingston bypass is quite quite a road for John Cooper. This time it wasn't so good. This time the rear suspension, the ball joint on the rear suspension of the chassis, it broke, making John Cooper have to, the car somersaulted several times and he ended up hitting a wall. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and he said that may well have saved him, but he cut his head right across here, broke several bones in his body, and I'm very lucky to still be with us. He may, if that could have finished John Cooper, and we wouldn't be with Mini now. You know, BMW Mini may not have existed because obviously he went on later on in time to do these things. After this accident, he came down to Littlehampton in West Sussex. He came down there to convalesce and found he quite liked it down there, and bought a little bungalow. And he was getting a little itchy feet, but Mrs. Cooper was getting sick and tired of him, so she decided that, you know, you've got to do something, John. You know, you can't just be around my feet all the time. So he then went on and he bought a garage in Ferring, which he then called John Cooper Garages. That's the picture of the garage when he first bought it.
We're Legion now.
Now that was opened in 1971, and if you have a look on your second to last page there, you'll see the original certificate of invitation, not certificate, sorry, which I've got a copy here of the original invitation that Jack Brabham opened.
Did they sell service, Chris? Did you get the garage in Worthing?
No, that was still, then they rented it out to the police,
Oh, right.
the traffic police up
Yeah,
there.
that's right.
So that was in 1971. I started Cooper's in 1982, where they first started building the Cooper Metro. Now the Cooper Metro belonged to John and Michael, and I now own the car myself. Apart from it being a rare car, it also has a lot of sentimental value. That's a picture of John, Michael and the brother-in-law with the car at Ferring. I wish it looked like that in the moment, but yeah, so MG came along 6 months later, put the same wheels on and everything else. Apart from putting twin carbs on, they put single carb on. So they lost out on that. But in 1985, Cooper went on to the British Grand Prix. And when he came back, he said he had some fantastic news. Now, Honda wanted him to become a Honda dealership. He'd already built them a Formula One car back in the 60s, which we later became an NSX dealer, and we did very well at the time. But if you look on your last page on there, you'll see that this was when the day that they asked him, and John Cooper was the guest of honour that day, on the 19th of July 1985, which was 2 days after his birthday. And the invitation as well, when he opened the garage, was also on the 19th of July. So Coopers were doing really well at the time, selling lots of Hondas and things. But the Japanese market for minis was they wanted to get as many as they could get their hands on. So they were buying cars that they would like to go out of fashion. But John and Michael, they decided to do a 998 kit, which they put in wooden boxes and sent out to Japan. Now those wooden boxes, those were built in the workshop by the lads as overtime money. And then they went on to, those boxes got onto TV and in newspapers, and they were using them as coffee tables. And as you can see, these are the parts that were boxed up and sent out. This is just the certificate, John Cooper's card, and these all went in that box.
Apart from that one.
Apart from that one, yes, this was just a sample. But yes, that was a sample back then. So, yeah, so we sent 1275 kits out as well. They were just wanting as many as they could. And after that, we did a 998 conversion like Jill's got, and Jill still owns. And I'm very proud that I sold her the conversion, and she still owns that Mini Rose, which was the only one we ever did. And then we wanted to do a 1275 conversion, and Rover said, oh, well, we're not sure really. So we did 1275, and we took it up to Gaydon. They got it homologated. That was our prototype, which now Howard owns, Howard Taylor. So that car's still in existence, and without that, that would have been the end of Mini. So, but they said what we'll do is we'll build 1,000 cars from that, which we'll call the RSP. And if they sold 1,000, that's great. But if not, they said that's it. We're not doing no more. So John and Michael came back, they were quite pleased. They were driving her home, and John said to Michael, he says, "I'm really pleased that they want my signature on the bonnet." So Mike said, "Yeah, it is. It's nice touch." So John said, "The only thing is, I don't really want to go up and sign 1,000 bonnets." So Michael said, "Don't worry, Dad, they're going to put stickers on there." So yeah, so that was, it lasted another 10 years from then. So we built a lot of limited edition minis. We built 35 Grand Prix. We built John Cooper LEs, which were 25. Michael had some special cars built. We built special cars for different people with their want aircon, they want electric windows, all sorts of things that we built. We built a Mini Cooper Touring and Sport 5s, and the Sport 5s has the jackknife gearbox. Now the jackknife gearboxes had a tendency of going wrong. And John Cooper never missed a trick. Normally Monday mornings he would ask, "Chris, what's that Mini doing in the car park?" I would say, "Well, which one, Mr. Cooper?" You know, the car park was full of Minis at the time. "Well, you know the one with the white roof." Anyway, obviously he was referring to another broken down Sport 5. I said, "Well, I think Tony Franks knows about that one. He was the workshop foreman," and he would go, "Tony, tell me about the Sport 5. And Tony obviously would say, "Oh, well, you know, another one gone." "Right, get jackknife on the phone now. Now I want to speak to him. Well, he used to deal with jackknife, obviously with his Formula 1 cars and that, because he used to put jackknife gearboxes in them. But obviously then we'd have to send them back, and we'd have another gearbox and another one go a few months later. Every Christmas, John would take everybody and give them an extra week's wages in a brown envelope. So he'd come round and say, Chris, thanks much for what you've done. Mick, you know, he would say thank you very much. And he would take us out for Christmas dinner and pay for all the food and drinks. And after dinner he would get up and tell us some stories. True funny racing day stories. And one of his was, which he always wanted to tell, was when he was at the workshop with the corrugated roofs and sides. He said the boys were really cold in the winter, so they said, can you do something about the heating? So Charles said, right, of course I can. So he picked up a round paraffin heater and he stuck it right in the middle of the workshop. He said, right, if you want central heating, you've got it. So yes, he went on, he was a very tight man, Charles Cooper. But we've had many memories of John. He went to took us to shows like Bewley, Silverstone, London to Brighton, up to Gaydon with him, with the mill, and all sorts of things. And he also supported the Italian Children in Need with Freddie. Yes, he was always there, and he always gave out prizes. And now, what he used to do, and obviously I'm good friends with his grandson, when he used to get to Bewley, he used to come in his Civic, and then his grandson would drive the Mini to Bewley. He'd get out, and then he'd get into the Mini and drive into Bewley. But you know, with his bad backs and things like that, you can understand it. It's a little way to drive. But yes, he was always there for everybody, always approachable. We had many visitors to the garage. We had Brick Etland, John Surtees, and if you were around, he would always make sure that you were introduced to them. So he would say, oh, Chris, this is Brick Etland, and Brick Etland, you know, or whatever. He would always make sure that you were always looked after. And when we went to places like Goodwood Festival of Speed, he would buy us all tickets. And then he would introduce us, make sure we met him at a certain time, and he'd introduce him to ex-drivers and things. So yes, we had some wonderful times. And in March 2000, John was awarded the CBE for his achievements. And it was quite late really, because unfortunately John died and passed away on Christmas Eve 2000. Mike took over the reins of the dealership. John passed as the classic Mini finished. Mike took on the new Mini, developing the JCW and the Mini BMW. And thank you very much.